it made me it made me nostalgic for a time and place, one that I've never been to before,
Right.
but two that also seems rather awful.
Hey, my name is Alon.
And I'm David, and welcome to our podcast, I Finally Watched, where we talk about movies that at least one of us hasn't seen before. And I finally watched Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver stars Robert De Niro as Travis Bickle, who is a loner and what would probably be described today as an incel. He's someone who has trouble with human interaction, and he also has sort of a hatred for the society he lives in, especially in New York City. He describes it, the people around him as scum. He's around a lot of prostitutes and Johns and people committing crimes. And throughout the movie, he gets more and more upset by this and kind of deteriorates more and more into madness. Um, and he runs into some other characters that sort of help him along on this journey into madness.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you talking to me?
Oh, get the! Oh my
Are
God, that's
you
so
are
bad.
you talking to me?
Did you
No,
choose
I'm
to do
sorry.
this just so you could do that?
Yeah, pretty much. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So, I mean, it's it's a classic movie with very like famous lines and I feel like so many movies of today and past have taken the tropes and parodied the dialogue that has come out of this movie. It's one of the great movies of our time. Would you say that?
I would agree. I had never seen it before, and then watched it twice over the last couple days. And I think it's kind of a very, you say, simplistic story, but at the same time, it involves, I guess I don't want to get into the ending of it. It's a simple story, but it's kind of complex in the character development of Travis Bickle, played by De Niro. And yeah, I think this is a movie that obviously a lot of people that call themselves cinephiles have seen, but I'd say the majority of people, it's probably one, especially younger people, that know the lines from it, know some facts about it, but may have never actually seen the movie.
Yeah, and I'm actually quite surprised because I know you as quite a cinephile, and you've never seen this. Like you mentioned, we saw this together uh, through kind of we watched it together, and we were on House Party. The the thing that excited me most watching this with you was right as we pushed play, you went, "Oh, so what is this movie about?" And I just thought, oh man, you're in for like quite a treat because it does have a really, like you said, simplistic plot. But once again, I think we watched a movie that mainly focused on the character uh, and the character's development.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I think besides just noticing that, I think you also notice the direction of it. Um, I think I talk about this a lot, but the score is something, especially on the second watch, that really it made me it made me nostalgic for a time and place, one that I've never been to before,
Right.
but two that also seems rather awful. New York City in the 70s. I do know a little bit about the time that I believe it did. There was like kind of a very high crime rate around that time and area. And there's been several movies that kind of have dealt with that too, like Death Wish, things like that. And so it was just funny to me that with the score is it's kind of romantic, and so yeah, it's
Hmm.
romanticizing the city and made me feel like I was missing it, even though, like I said, never
Yeah.
experienced it.
I mean, I noticed the score too. As I mentioned previously in, I think it was our master episode, I mentioned that I don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff, music wise, but I'm trying, I'm starting to. And the score is definitely something I noticed, because not only does it romanticize the city, but I felt like it romanticized him, like his actions, and his actions weren't that great. Like the motive behind them initially, and we'll get more into that, but it was almost like hyping you up with the music, being like, okay, yeah, he's gonna do this and it's gonna be awesome. When in reality, it's like, no, I actually hope that doesn't happen.
Well, and I actually, so obviously going into this movie, I have an idea of what he turns out to be, and De Niro, and you know that he kind of goes somewhat crazy. And I was wondering if this is a movie I hadn't seen, if I had seen in 1976 going into it. I honestly think it kind of plays to where he's somewhat normal in the beginning. You know, he
Hmm.
talks about how he can't sleep and that he wants to make the extra money. And then he meets this woman who, she says she's a little scared of him in the beginning because he's kind of just watching her from his taxi cab. But then when he meets her, she's very intrigued by him, and she agrees to even go on a second date. And seems very interested in him, and until he messes it up. So it was kind of interesting to me that you could almost tell that had I had no information about this movie whatsoever, I would have gone into it thinking, oh, I guess he is a pretty normal guy. And I think that was kind of the point a little bit. But at the same time, he's a really weird character. Just he's not able to communicate well with people in a normal way, in what I would consider a normal way.
Well, what's strange is when he first walks into the political headquarters, he's kind of charming. He goes in, he's like, oh, I want to volunteer, but we find out it's kind of an elaborate pickup line to get her on a date with him. And he nails it. He succeeds in getting her out to get coffee. And
And
so,
pie with cheese on it.
right, which, ew, but
I've,
each to their own.
I guess, yeah, it sounds gross.
um, yeah, and you see that he can pull off normal. He can be charming, but then different social cues where she thinks they're going to a normal movie, and it turns out to be like one of those like peep show triple X movies, and she gets disgusted by it. And for like you can see on his face for a while, he doesn't see what he did wrong. There was no problem with what he did, so he's definitely missing important social cues. And I think that her leaving him and not returning any of his calls is kind of like the break point for him, where he's like, okay, now, I'm a taxi driver. I don't really have, a connection with my family. I don't have a girlfriend. So I have to find a point in my life. I have to find a purpose, which I think can be quite understandable. If you have nothing going for you, you kind of strive to find a greater purpose.
Yeah, and going back to kind of his, he takes her to the porn movie and doesn't understand what's wrong with that, and afterwards calls her and he's like, well, were you sick? Because I mean, that would probably explain why you left. And it's like he just kind of doesn't get it, and you sort of get a little bit of that too the first time he hangs out with the other cab drivers at the diner, and he doesn't seem to be able to talk to people.
And he just like stares at people like kind of creepily. um I don't actually agree with you why he, like, when he called her and was like, hey, are you sick? I think he knew at that point. This is my opinion. I think he knew at that point what he did wrong, I think he just wanted to put an excuse up for her to either say, yeah, I was sick, let's do it again, and she didn't take the bait. That's kind of was my understanding of it.
Right.
I
Right.
don't know. I mean,
No, I mean, I can definitely see that. I just, yeah, I think it's just the whole point of that is to kind of, I don't know, to just show him as, I guess, kind of not normal, um, just a little kind of outside of society.
yeah. I think especially with the plot line of the sorry, let me just back up a little bit and let's say spoiler warning from here on. Um,
Sounds good.
so the girl that he goes out with, her name's Betsy, and Betsy is like one of the head volunteers of this political nominee for president. Um, and so he goes to kind of befriend this. Uh, when he's driving one night, the presidential nominee ends up in the back of his cab, coincidentally, and he supports him. You know he doesn't really know anything about politics, but he supports him because the girl that he has a crush on supports him. But then after that is called off, the date, you see this turn where he's like, okay, now I'm out to like get this guy.
Yeah, and what I really liked, and I think it was kind of Scorsese showing off a little bit in this instance, is when he's talking about Palantine, who's the presidential nominee. He makes a reference to, he says all the king's men couldn't put him back together again, um, which obviously is Humpty Dumpty. But there's also the movie All the King's Men, which I think is a version in the '40s that won Best Picture, and then obviously I think there was like a remake that was
Mm-hmm.
panned in the late or middle of 2000. But I guess I could say spoiler warning to All the King's Men from the 1940s, but um, that movie ends with a politician being killed. And so while there's a lot of clues to what's happening, if you know that movie, if you're into movies as much as Scorsese is, he's just telling you right then and there with that reference, this is what's happening from here on out. I'm going to try and kill this guy. That's my mission. And if
He
you
goes
don't get,
into yeah,
I
I'm
was going
sorry,
to
go ahead.
say, and if you don't get that reference, you can still get all these context clues of what's happening, but you're also just a little less sure. Well, what is it? Maybe he's just scoping her out. He's going
Mm-hmm.
to all these rallies, but maybe he's just there to see her because he's still infatuated with her.
Well, the first time I'm watching this, I thought he was there because he starts working out. He starts trying to, as he said, train his body to be optimal fitness. So he starts working out, he starts getting back in shape, and then he buys all these guns and he's fixing all these like holsters to his body and with the knife on his boot and everything like that. And like you said, he shows up to the rally. And at first I was like, well, is he there to like assassinate her, like to kill her?
Right.
And it's strange because I haven't seen it in years, up until where we rewatched it again. And I had a very different memory of the movie in my head. So, like, Jodie Foster is in this movie. She plays a 12 and a half year old prostitute. And he kind of befriends her in a way and then saves her in the end. But in my head, um, they're kind of friending each other from like the very start of the movie, and it did not go that way at all. It's like a very last second plot point, major plot point, but it seems like it's very much towards the middle end. And then the whole assassinating the presidential candidate, um, in my head I thought he successfully went through with it and he died. And then rewatching it, and he didn't die, and he didn't meet Jodie Foster, or he didn't really get to like talk to Jodie Foster until like, an hour and 15 minutes or something like that into the movie. I was
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
man, I remember this completely wrong.
Well, obviously, I don't remember anything, but I was reading a little bit, and there were people that thought the movie ended. That a lot of people might have remembered it that De Niro died in the end too. And
Yep.
rewatching it this second time earlier today, it would seem like almost a perfect ending too. He goes in, shoots a pimp and an upper level pimp, and this runner, this guy that runs the hotel where the prostitutes work.
The brothel.
I don't know if you would call it a brothel. I think brothels are legal, right?
1974, maybe not.
We'll look that up later. So, and then he kills these guys, and then he turns the gun on himself, and it's empty, so he can't kill himself. And then he just sits there, and the cops come in, and then there's this beautiful overhead shot that pans out of the apartment building, from De Niro over the cops. Outside, there's 50 onlookers and a bunch of cops, and this kind of the beautiful score, setting in. And it's like, oh, wow, that would be a great ending. And then there's this scene after that,
Mm-hmm.
where De Niro...
In that way, it kind of reminded me of Mystic River, where you have this kind of perfect ending, and then you have 10 extra minutes of the movie at the end.
Right. And the ending of the 10 extra minutes or whatever in this movie, I don't know if you saw it this way. I was kind of, upon second viewing, wondering, there's a lot of things in this movie that don't make sense. The fact that Betsy would go out with De Niro in the first place, someone that's kind of been stalking her. But then this scene at the end where he's painted as a hero, I can see that. There's a 12-year-old prostitute, and this guy came in and killed a bunch of guys with guns that were her pimps. But then after that, Betsy, presumably wanting to kind of get together with him, she purposely gets in the back of his cab and makes him drive her somewhere, and she, seemingly wants to have a conversation with him, but he's decided, no, I don't want anything to do with you. I mean, that almost kind of all seemed sort of dreamlike in a way, that it could possibly just be the fantasy of a dying man. I just wanted to know if you thought of that as a possibility, or if you more took it as the real story of he survived and was painted as a hero, and Betsy wanted to get back together with him.
I never thought of it as like a false ending, like everything's in his head, or that's in his head. It's kind of like when you say, their relationship was in his head, reminds me of Joker. And
which that, I think, not to interrupt, but that greatly affected my viewing of this movie, having seen Joker first.
Yeah, because you get all the homages that Joker pays to Taxi Driver, and it's actually, the similarities are quite uncanny. Robert De Niro also being in both and playing pretty much the opposite side of the coin on that one. But where it is, spoiler alert for Joker, where it is all in his head, their relationship in the Joker, I did not feel that for this movie. For Taxi Driver, I think it all happened. I'm actually quite proud of you, because I feel like you've been taking the stuff I've been saying about your gullibility towards the film has made you kind of like think about like, oh, maybe this actually didn't happen or something like that. But there was nothing, I don't know, there was nothing else that alluded to it being in his head. Yeah, he's a liar, but everything on screen there was no reason to think that that part was in his head. Nothing alluded to that
The only
being
reason
made up.
the only thing I could see that maybe could lead someone to believe that is when he's looking in the rearview mirror at Betsy in the back of his cab. She does to me look a little bit
Hmm.
dream-like the way she's kind of lit and viewed. Um, it also to me just makes sense from kind of a storytelling standpoint. Um, you have this guy that is extremely unlikable throughout the movie, and doesn't really, I think you could argue, doesn't really deserve a redemptive arc.
Right.
Um, he's going to assassinate uh, a presidential candidate because a woman turned him down.
Right.
And then because he has also befriended this prostitute, he then murders three people um, in cold blood and becomes a hero for it. So the ending is sort of, I still liked it, but I think it would be hard to swallow for some, especially if it had come out. We a lot of times we talk about how would this movie be perceived today. I mean, the blowback that Joker got, I
Yeah.
think, would be nothing compared to if this exact movie was released in 2018, 2019.
Yeah. Um,
I mean,
I
not
mean,
that's
it's
not even to talk about what you might about to bring up. If a 12-year-old Jodie Foster was in this movie, like super uncomfortable.
right. Yeah. And, she plays a 12-year-old prostitute. And I believe at the time she was actually 12 years old. And so it's a very uncomfortable um, move on the casting direction of this film. But it works. I think it does appropriately set up the motive for him basically dying for her. He doesn't, but he very. I mean, I see what you're saying. Everything that like happens in that scene where he goes and saves her. He gets shot in the neck. He gets shot in the arm. Probably like a few other places. And from those wounds alone, I would be like, dude, how are you alive? You know. Um,
Right.
I see how it could be like a dreamlike, but I never took it that way. I kind of like it where he does have this redemption, and he kind of seems to normalize. That's not really a word. He seems to normalize out um,
Maybe. I mean,
at the end.
because in the end, and I think that's the point of it. Maybe to show a little bit of growth. Um, he he doesn't take the bait with Betsy. He he has the chance to presumably get back together with her, and he drives off. He doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And also about Jodie Foster too. Like one thing, there is obviously I think there was a controversy back then, probably with her being in it. There would definitely have been one now, but she did do amazing in the movie. You could tell from that age she was a great actress. So, which is something I think a lot of people take away from that.
Yeah, I think the scene that she really shines in is when they're both at the diner having breakfast. I thought she just was like, so she in the movie she's quite mature for her age, but I think her acting made that come across that while she is mature for her age, she still has that really childlike behavior, and I thought that was just beautifully represented in that scene. I mean, it's a
And
great movie.
the other thing too is, and I want to talk a little bit about the way it was, the format of it, the structure of it. So the movie is for the most part a first person movie from De Niro's point of view, and there's only, from what I remember, two scenes that he's not in. And I actually really liked the first scene he's not in with Tom and Betsy, where they're talking about, can you light a match with only, two fingers on one hand? And then they go into the story about Tom starts talking about how the Italian mafia would put canaries on people, and she's like, well, why not pigeons? And he's like, huh, it's a good question. Oh wait, you'd have to catch a pigeon. You can just buy a canary. That's why.
Right,
I
right.
just, I think Scorsese did. I really like that scene. Has no business really being in there, but I love that scene. It's like very interesting, very funny, and I think the one thing that makes this movie so great to me is just his little touches to it. The way he directed it. I think his uh his scene where he actually acted in it was funny. I think it's something I knew I had kind of known about, and then when he popped up, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And his scene where he just keeps repeating himself, trying to get De Niro's attention to answer him, and De Niro won't answer him, and he, says some inflammatory things and says he's going to kill his wife, and De Niro's just looking at him like, I'm crazy, which De Niro's kind of crazy. So looking at another guy that's crazy was just
Well,
that
yeah,
whole scene was very funny too.
yeah. So that was Scorsese, huh? I didn't know that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. He
that's cool.
interesting. He wanted to cast himself in it, but yeah, I just really wanted to point out, like, this movie is great not only because there's a couple great performances from De Niro and Sybil Shepherd as Betsy, and obviously Jodie Foster, but I think this movie in another director's hands um, would not have been anywhere near as great as what Scorsese did.
No, I agree. And also I would even say that this movie in another lead actor's hands would not have been as great if it was anyone else other than Robert De Niro.
Well, yeah. Modern day, who would you cast if they did this movie modern day?
Uh, it would probably be actually
I mean, they did
maybe like,
they did a year ago, so I guess we could say Joaquin.
well, you know what's so funny about Joaquin Phoenix is I saw a clip the other day with him in Signs, and I completely forgot that was him in Signs, and he looks so young. But in Joker, Joaquin is like 40 something years old, and in Joker he plays a 20 something year old, and I just was like, I Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver plays a 20 what 26 27-year old,
He says he's
and
26.
yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I'm 27. I don't feel like I look as old as Robert De Niro back in Taxi Driver, or as old as Joaquin Phoenix and Joker. But I think I kind of going along that I not really thinking about age, but thinking about acting techniques. Probably like a Tom Hardy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I think Tom Hardy can do most things. So
Tom Hardy, or even like a Ryan Gosling.
yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah.
Because Ryan Gosling in Drive kind of also reminded me of this character too.
A lot of long stares, limited dialogue. Yeah, I overall though, you can't you can't make this movie again. There would have to be so many drastic changes to the plot.
Yeah, and they well,
The Jodie Foster storyline would have to be, she'd have to be 17. Like, you know what I mean? Like, she'd have to be 17 and played by a 25-year-old.
right. I mean, you say you can't really make this movie again. I mean, they kind of did with the Joker, honestly. And I
I'm just
feel like
talking.
I know what you
Yeah,
mean. I know what you mean. But I just feel like with this movie being such a staple, being a cornerstone in Hollywood filmography, a lot of films after Taxi Driver, I feel, kind of paid homage to Taxi Driver. It's set. I would even say it's set kind of like a subgenre of its own.
no, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, you know, this is like the second or third time I've seen it. I I love it probably more and more every time I have seen it, and I will see it again. I, I'll probably see it, I don't know, once every couple of years because it's just such like you said, a nostalgic film, a artsy, moody film that definitely puts you, not in a good mood, but in a mood for sure. What about you? You liked it? You would? I take it you like it, but you would see it again?
Yeah, I think I definitely appreciated it more on the second watch. I got so much more out of it, and so I definitely will see this again. At least one more time, but probably a few, probably over the years. Go back to it multiple times for sure.
Yeah. No, it's that good.
Well, this has been I finally watched Taxi Driver. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.